Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library. My name is Emily, and I'm on the events team here. And we are so happy to partner with Literati Bookstore, as always, to bring Michelle Segar here to talk about her new book, The Joy Choice. So Michelle is let me make sure I get this right, a research scientist at the Institute for Research on Women and Gender. Yes, great. Okay, so just a couple of things. So Michelle's going to give her talk, and when she takes questions, if you could please raise your hands so that way everyone can hear. I can hand you the mic so you can ask your question into the mic so everyone can hear it. After the talk is over, Michelle is going to come over here to sign books. Literati, you walked past them on your way in here, so if you haven't bought a book from them already, feel free to get a book after the event. And with that, I will hand it to Michelle.
Thank you for coming. I want to thank Literati and the Ann Arbor Library for hosting and having me talk about the new book today. I also know that this is a significant, heavy day with lots of things going on, so I just want to acknowledge that, and hopefully this talk can bring a little bit of joy on a day that is as somber as this one. I want to acknowledge my mom who made it here, and my dad's here in spirit, even though he couldn't make it tonight, and my husband and son, who's right there, and my sister and brother-in-law, and I have lots of friends here, so thank you. Hi, everyone. I wanted to let you know that this is going to be informal, so I do have some prepared comments. Those of you who know me know that I do a lot of speaking, and so I'm hoping this can be more of a conversation since this is a lovely space, and so I welcome questions in the middle. Feel free to raise your hand if you're curious about something that I haven't commented on. And I also want to say that I would like to dedicate tonight's talk to my mother-in-law, Carol Horowitz, who died in January, and I know she would have really loved to have been here. So I am going to go back and forth between reading some passages and talking about the ideas in the book and how I got here. So I'm kind of going to wind around. Stephanie, her husband, and their two teenagers were enjoying their annual weekend at a beach house with two other families they had become friends with when their kids were in preschool. The families had been eagerly awaiting this time to be together, and they had each contributed to a dish to their traditional celebratory Sunday feast. It was a noisy, fun-filled meal with lots of laughter. But at dessert, things got a little sticky for Stephanie when her friend brought forth a beautiful 3-layer cake she had baked especially for the occasion. For the last 4 months, Stephanie had been committed to a new eating plan, and chocolate cake was not on it. While she was still surprised by it, her more mindful eating had reduced the intense craving for dessert that she used to have. Yet, she has had a very hard time saying no, especially in social settings. From our conversation, I knew she had been feeling really great about her new way of eating. She had come to coaching deeply committed to making this change, and after 4 months, she was going strong. I had witnessed her transformation from being rebellious about having to make different eating choices to a deep sense of ownership and satisfaction that embodied the type of self-determination that is thought to be important for cultivating long-term change. But something else just as powerful was staring her down in that moment. For Stephanie, not having dessert at this event was more complicated than turning down the cake. On a deeper level, it meant that she was not meeting the needs of people she cared deeply about. Just the thought of bursting the communal cake bubble evoked feelings of selfishness and guilt. So despite not being hungry or even wanting the cake, Stephanie smiled and accepted a big slice to accommodate what she perceived to be the celebratory needs of the group. The moment that the cake was offered to Stephanie is what I'm calling the choice point. It's the challenging point that we didn't expect to come against our exercise plans or our healthy eating or intentional plans. And this is the reason that I wrote the book. So for almost 30 years, since 1993, all of my professional focus has been on trying to understand what is everything that gets in the way of people sustaining self-care behaviors like physical activity, healthy eating, meditation, getting enough sleep. And I've been doing that both as through research, starting with when I was a graduate student and as a health coach. Now, almost to the day, and I don't know if Literati remembers this, I was doing my book talk 7 years ago for No Sweat. And people have been wanting to know, why another book? And how is this different than No Sweat? And so what I want to explain about that is No Sweat was pretty much exclusively focused on exercise as the behavioral protagonist that I was treating. And it was also very focused on motivation and quality of motivation, and specifically how to help people do what I called transforming exercise from a chore to a gift. Now, there was more in the book, but that's what most people focused on, that's what the media focused on. And what I found over time was that the other part of the equation was missing, that people really weren't getting it, that my clients weren't getting it as much as I wanted them to. So the joy choice is about what happens after we set ourselves up for success, with having exercise or another behavior feeling like a gift. We can plan it, we can take ownership of it and feel positive about it, but at some point, challenges are going to arise. And I decided that I didn't have quite enough information in No Sweat, and I personally didn't know quite enough about how to help people successfully navigate these challenges or choice points. And so that's why I wrote the book. And I just want to read you another section. So let me get there. So this point of conflict becomes our choice point. And I'm calling it the true place of power. What we do here determines not only the fate of our specific eating and exercise plans, but our success in supporting the greater goals they aim to achieve. The joy choice is based on the assumption that many of the plans we do make do not work out, and it's all about learning how to effortlessly and joyfully negotiate these choice points. And a big part of that is having beliefs and strategies that work for rather than against you and all the meaningful things that make up your life. So, sustainable change is what I'm after. The consistent decisions that we make right now, and now, and now, and now, they don't have to be the same decisions, but they need to consistently support our greater eating and exercise goals. And so, and I'm looking at someone I've had lots of conversations with this about. One way that people think it might be a really great way, or even the best way to make consistent decisions, is to form automatic habits. And to start off this section, I want to read something from page 9. And I have my husband's permission to do this. Are you a habiter or an unhabiter? It's Tuesday, 5 a.m. in the middle of the winter, and our 100-year-old house in Ann Arbor, Michigan is dark and cold. I am huddled under the covers when my husband's alarm rings, as it does every morning. Jeff quickly turns it off, climbs out of bed, and heads for the basement, already dressed in workout clothes, so he doesn't have to think about anything other than starting his exercise. For decades, he has biked for 45 minutes, lifted weights, showered eaten breakfast, and headed off to work refreshed and ready for his day. He is a true believer in the power of his habit, and for good reason. It works for him. Can you relate to this? Let me be the first to say, I cannot. And perhaps you can't either. So this is the narrative of habit formation, and it works really well for Jeff. So as I was thinking about how to address this in the book, I developed a concept that I wanted to be fun, and so that people would feel comfortable really thinking more critically about the type of person that they are, and whether or not a traditional behavior change strategy, a very popular behavior change strategy like habit formation, can work for you. So Jeff is what I call a habiter, and I am the type of person that I refer to as an unhabiter. And habiters, generally, according to my definition, since I made it up, I get to decide what they are people who tend to be pretty disciplined and well-organized, and they pretty much follow through on what they say they're going to do. An unhabiter like me is less organized and might not follow through as much as I would hope to, and may have less innate discipline. And that is something that surprises people about me, because of the work I do. People assume that I'm this very disciplined vegetarian, vegan, do it perfectly right all the time. And, they couldn't be further from the truth. Not only do I like to gnaw on meat bones, but, I don't do it perfectly. I don't, follow the way that I like to eat perfectly. I don't exercise perfectly because, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, I think that the sense of perfection tends to get in the way, and I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. But I want to explain habit formation, and I know some of you in the audience has read the book and some haven't. Habit formation, the goal and the value, and there is a lot of value, is that we offload our need for cognition and willpower, so we just do something automatically. And if you think about a behavior like flossing, it's pretty easy to do. So let me explain the habit loop. The popular narrative on habit formation, and what most of the research is based on, is using what's called the habit loop, which has 3 parts. It's got a cue. We're talking about flossing. So the cue could be walking in the bathroom at night. It could be putting your toothbrush down, depending on when you floss. And then you do the floss. There is absolutely zero thinking. It's completely automated. Toothbrush down, reach for the floss. And then the third part of the habit loop is some type of positivity, sense of satisfaction. And it's that positivity, it doesn't have to be something like, woohoo, that kind of thing, but it's positive enough that your brain turns it into a habit, and it creates this automatic association that you just follow through. Now, for a behavior like flossing that happens in the bathroom, where there tend to be few distractions, it's easy to see how that would work pretty well. But if we walk outside of the bathroom and we think about doing something like healthy eating, so let's think about what that might consist of. We have to decide what healthy is. We might have to make a list and go to the grocery store, get to the grocery store, do the shopping, have a meal plan, have menus, cook, eat. So there's a lot of steps that go with healthy eating. Or exercise. There might be a plan to do something. Then you have to initiate that plan in some way, shape, or form. Then you have to do the plan. And so if you think about all of this, these 2 behaviors that are complex, there's multiple steps. Now, how does that habit loop, cue, behavior, reward, how does that habit loop stay standing if you are about to go to your planned class, whether it's at the gym or it's online, and one of your kids comes rushing at you that they have this urgent thing that they need to do, all of a sudden, that is completely disrupted. So I'm critiquing the value of habit formation, not for simple behaviors. I depend on my flossing habit at night. I depend on feeding my dog in the morning and giving him water, without having to think about it. But habit formation is based on certain assumptions. And one of the assumptions is that this habit loop will stay standing. Another thing that's important to understand is that despite its extreme popularity, and this really surprises people, there's actually very little research, very little evidence to support the idea that it produces sustainable changes in behavior. In fact, even interventions that have aimed to create flossing habits have been disappointing. So most of the research on habit formation has been with animals and in lab-based studies with university students. So if not, actually I'm going to pause there and see if people have questions, because that's kind of a natural place and I just kind of ended a segment. Does anyone have any questions about or concerns? Push back. Mark, you can push back if you want.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to push back, but I got to ask a question about, are there particular things, particular behaviors that have been helpful with habit formation and from the research that it shows?
So there's very little research showing that habit formation can effectively produce lasting changes. Again, there are people who are very successful forming habits, like Jeff, and Wendy Woods, who's one of the leading international researchers on habit formation and a big proponent of habit formation. She, when I read her book and heard her speak about it, she talked about the fact that she too sleeps in her exercise clothes because she wants to reduce friction. And friction is what gets in the way of the habit loop. But what the traditional research on habit formation doesn't do, and even the perspective on habit formation, because it's been so narrowly studied, it doesn't take a habit and think about how, a puking dog and 3 kids and a crazy job, how that impacts habit formation and maintenance. And that's really the biggest, that's what I view as the biggest problem with habit formation. Now, the exciting news is that there are people, and I'm going to name Allison Phillips, who is a researcher at Iowa State. And she is one of the habit researchers. I just recently had a phone conversation with her about this. And she is a really big believer in the power of habits. But she thinks that the narrative in the literature is overly simplified. And in the new conversations that I've been reading in the literature, and I am not a habit researcher, so I wanted to talk about these nuances with her to understand. She and other people are talking about there being 2 phases. So, like for exercise, for example, there's an initiation phase where there could be a habit formed. When you start, when you're about to go, is having a gym bag at the door in your car, is that a way to develop some type of initiation habit when an alarm goes off, right? Versus an execution of the behavior, which is, do you follow through? Or if you go to the gym, are you going to do the same behavior in an habitual way? Is there any thought involved? And so she and other people who are thinking along these lines are proposing that for a complex behavior like exercise, there's no way that you can form, an automatic habit unless you're doing it first thing in the morning, dressed in your clothes, the way, people who are successful do that. So does that help?
Yeah, no, you kind of raised a point too that I was thinking about as you were talking, that maybe there's two aspects to it. There's a habit formation, and then once the habit's established, continuing it or getting interrupted, and you kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe for complex behaviors there are. I'm on the fence right now. I'm trying to be open with the idea that maybe there's value in some type of initiation habit, but that on the flip side of that we want people to be prepared and understand how to navigate if something unexpected arises, including low motivation, which of course, this idea that we have to figure out how to successfully navigate our choice points, which is the core of the book, maybe that could be applied for the execution part. So I'm open to that idea, but that's just the emerging, or I shouldn't say the emerging, there is a group of people who don't agree with the more traditional classic definition of habits. So,
We have another.
oh yeah.
So I've been reading, and I think you're saying the same thing in different words. I've been reading that if you want to make a habit, you hook it on to something that you're already doing that makes it so you don't have to think about it, you don't have the initiation. So I wonder, is that the same or different than what you're saying?
No, that is what the cue behavior is. So if you hook, that's the less technical way of thinking about it. And research does show that when you do hook the behavior you want onto something, so for example, before the craziness of the book launch, I hooked meditation to getting ready in the morning, and so that time made it really easy. It was after I took my son to school. There wasn't really a way for disruption to happen. So that is what it is. It's the cue behavior reward. But if you're trying to hook the behavior to something else out in the craziness of life, it's still not, it may be a helpful strategy, but there's still a lot that can get in the way. So, yes.
It's just interesting to hear you because in my professional world, they tried to get us to do this in our job, but they called it habit stacking, but it sounds a lot like what you're talking about.
Yes, that is habit stacking. That's the official term for that. Thank you, yes. And, again, for very simple things, like brushing and flossing, or teaching someone how to make espressos for their job where there's, that's their job. One thing is next to the other, typically not typically, but oftentimes the person who is making the coffee drinks is not the same person who's dealing with the customer, so that they develop, and people train professionals how to do that in habit formation ways. Here's the thing, when things are mechanical, like playing an instrument, or we're learning to do things in a rote way, and that is what habit formation is really good for. Uh-oh.
No. So your insights and expertise have incredibly changed my thinking about these things. So we have the physiology, of course, of addiction.
Yes.
Which is the extreme of this, where people go to unbelievable lengths to do things that are rewarding. But what I wanted to ask about is so many of the things that we ask people doesn't have a real reward at the end. I would ask Eli if you'd rather enjoy eating 3 donuts or not. And one of the things we're trying to do with this, of course, is get people to eat better, which often means not to eat 3 donuts. So there's no reward for that. So I don't see a reward in asking patients to take drugs for an asymptomatic condition that make them feel like crap. I don't see,
Yes.
the reward thing is, I wish it were there all the time, which the addiction
Yes.
example is the extreme.
Yes.
But tell me about the situations where you want to create habits, And I don't think many kids would think that flossing has a reward either. So there's a lot of these things that don't have the reward. How do you deal with the lack of a real reward
Right.
in trying to implement these changes?
Sure, and of course, I am not advocating for habit formation, which necessitates this type of positivity. So when things are not rewarding, I mean, this is great. This is what I was hoping that we would. I'm going to jump ahead to later in the book. So there's something called value-based decision making, and basically our brains are set up to make decisions about things that feel good and to try to avoid things that feel bad. So how do we help someone eat, maybe deal with their cravings for foods that they're not, technically addiction. For some people they may be, but in general, people might just feel cravings and want to eat in a certain way. And there's someone who's doing really interesting work on this. So how do you help people not eat the 3 donuts that they may want and be inclined to do? And I have become a really big fan of his, Judson Brewer. I think he was somewhere else. I think he's at Yale now. But he's gotten a lot of attention recently. But I came upon his work many years ago about smoking cessation. And I was so a very similar thing. How do you get someone to stop smoking when they are, that's a true addiction. But when I was talking about my previous work, or the early work with no sweat and exercise, and how to help people develop positive feelings about exercise so that they can want to exercise instead of feel like they should and try to reject that. And people would say to me, according to your model, if I create a positive experience with exercise, and then I'm going to do it more, but eating the cookie feels good, so that the model, and again, my model is not this rote habit formation model. It's just based on the idea that if we develop positive associations and feelings with exercise, as the research shows, we'll be much more likely to want to do it and to enact it. And the people who sustain physical activity in general positive experiences do that. But so people would say to me, but Michelle, your model, how does it work for eating? Or how does it work for smoking cessation? So I started looking in the literature, and I came across Judson Brewer's work, who I talk about with eating, but his first work was with addiction and with smoking. He's a psychiatrist, PhD, and what he showed was that if you help people who smoke become mindful of their cravings, very counterintuitively, if you teach people to develop a really acute awareness of how you feel when you're craving something, that better predicts long-term quitting than a gold standard smoking cessation program. And so that was his early work, and now he's doing work with eating, and he's showing similar things, that when you teach people to become very aware of their cravings, that mindfulness helps you kind of ride the wave instead of be pulled under by it. And so in those situations, I think if we can become aware of the craving or the want and the desire, think about it. When we crave something, if it's this feeling, this physiological urge, which I refer to as temptation in the book, if we don't have like a heightened awareness, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this wave right now, it's a tsunami, it's gonna take over. But if you can name it, and this is another person that I greatly admire, Dan Siegel, he says, name it to tame it. He's a neuroscientist. So when you name something, you basically, not only is this kind of like, in theory, you get some control over it, but I believe research shows that it pulls you a little bit out of the amygdala area and more into the prefrontal thinking cortex. So I'm trying to decide if I answered your question or not. Okay, now, it looks like there was another question here.
Did you have a question? That's okay. Okay. And is there another question? Okay.
Okay, so this is great. And we can circle back to this too. So if you're not a habiter, what's the solution for you? And to address that, I'm going to do a little reading. And the section is called Forever Blowing Bubbles. Just for now, think of all the bits and pieces of your life as bubbles. We've got a lot of separate bubbles moving around in our daily lives. Work, family, health, finances, and housing are the big ones, the ones we naturally prioritize. Some are larger, some are smaller, some rise to the top, some fall to the bottom or cling to the sides. They bump up against one another all the time. Sometimes when they collide, they burst on impact. Sometimes one or two bubbles merge, changing direction as they do. These life bubbles are dynamic, changing size and always on the move. When we embark on a new eating strategy or exercise regimen, to finally be able to be all that we can be, our eating or exercise plan bubble tends to get overinflated, obscuring all of the other life bubbles. Perhaps because it's idealized and it contains our perfect goal, we believe it will never burst. But then life happens, and that's like the premise of this whole book. Our eating and exercise bubble bumps up against a higher priority bubble like work or family and bursts on impact, sending all the plans and aspirations right down the drain. As physiological beings, we have a real need to care for our bodies. Just to stay alive, we need to get enough food, water, and sleep, and to some degree move our bodies. But to do more than just survive, we also need to live our lives, fulfilling meaningful life roles as employees, students, entrepreneurs, clinicians, professionals, creators, etc. At any given time, a different bit of our life suddenly rises to the top of the priority list, needing our attention and our care, and in the process, often creating a very real conflict with our eating or exercise plan. And as you know already, this point of conflict becomes our choice point. And I consider this the true place of power. And that is what has really, really compelled me to write the book. When I thought about this, it's so mundane. These things that happen are so mundane, we don't think about them enough. But we always start a new exercise plan or a new eating plan, but eventually something derails it and we stop. And then we start again, and something derails it, and we stop. And this cycle of starting and stopping and starting and stopping, but never sustaining, is what happens. So I thought, we really need to think and talk more about what happens, what we can do to derail the stopping, to stop the stopping, if you will. And so this point of decision, this point of conflict, this choice point is the place of power, because if we can stop the stop, then we can sustain. So again, one of the differences between this book and my first book is that the first book, No Sweat, basically reflected the last 20 years of my work. So most of the, I wouldn't say most, but to a great extent, the research in No Sweat constituted the coaching I'd been doing and the academic research I've been doing, with other people's research sprinkled in. This book is the opposite. I feel like it represents the next 20 years of my life and work, and it's mostly other people's work, other people's research, with a little bit of my coaching story sprinkled in and some of my research sprinkled in. And because it was other people's research and because I had to dive into these other scientific areas, it was really hard. It was really hard. No Sweat, well, I didn't plan this, but it was no sweat. This was the opposite, and you can ask my family if that's true. So reading about other people's work and trying to understand it and needing to talk to the researchers and talk to people who worked in the area so that I could make sure I understood things right or understand what they were. And one of the pieces of work that I learned about was classic psychology that I probably learned in my PhD but didn't remember, or maybe I didn't learn it at all. But it has to do with Kurt Lewin's concept of life space. And Kurt Lewin's, which his work is just completely circling back, and almost any researcher in behavior change is talking about his work now, which is really interesting. And I think the reason why everyone's talking about it is because he has this very foundational concept where whether or not we stick with a behavior when we make a choice, there are two sets of forces. There's the drivers and there's the disruptors. And depending on which has more force, that determines whether or not you make the choice you had intended to do. And so one of the things he said is that we shouldn't be actually thinking about how to create drivers. Instead, we should be focused on what are the disruptors and how do we overcome those things. Now, the disruptors will eventually get at the drivers because we do have to figure out how to help people be motivated or to want to do something, even if it's not pleasurable to do. But he said, and this is where he was a social psychologist, and so that brings not just the head space, but like the whole world space, which is what we need, which is, I think, what's been missing from the traditional habit research. And in our life space, we don't just bring our beliefs and attitudes and what's going on right now in our schedule and what we need to do today, but we bring our whole life history with the behaviors that we're trying to change. We bring our whole life history as human beings and our insecurities and the kinds of feelings that Stephanie brought when she decided to eat the dessert even though she didn't want to. We bring all of that to every choice point. So we really have to have a great appreciation for, when we say, oh, I got a Peloton bike and I signed up for this and I really want to do this, or my doctor told me I need to do this, I'm really committed this time. That is, when you think about what we bring to every single now and now and now, is profound. And so if we're not prepared to address those things, if we're not understanding them, then they have power over us. And so I want to read something. One of my main executive functioning experts, who is not here right now, but was someone I called on, is Allison Miller, who's a professor in health behavior and health education. And, when I was learning about chaos, again, part of our choice point, part of that situation, the context we're making a choice, I talked to her about chaos because she researches eating in the family context. And so I just want to read a little something that she said to me. So she's at Michigan School of Public Health, and she conducts research related to executive functioning, eating, and weight-related outcomes in family contexts. She sees chaos as impacting the behavior change game in a couple of ways, especially when it comes to managing meal planning, prep, and implementation for a family. If home life is generally chaotic and it's taking a lot of attention and effort to manage the basics, she explains, like getting up and out the door, it's hard to layer on extra effort, like having ingredients for a healthy meal on hand, not to mention enough time and cognitive steps to plan and prepare it. Furthermore, if the chaos is also causing stress, it may be more tempting to eat comfort foods as a strategy to regulate your emotions. So there's even a scale called the chaos scale. So again, let's step outside of rat-based cue behavior reward research and go into a family context that's chaotic, and that's chaotic for people who are privileged. Let's consider people who are unprivileged, how much exponentially more chaotic that is. So, so the chaos is one of these disruptors that is invisible but powerful. And there are other disruptors. So if we're going to go back to Kurt Lewin's advice, which is to focus on what gets in the way, there are other disruptors. And I'm going to skip over some reading because I want to have time to talk about the other side of the book, which is executive functioning. But I want to say that through my coaching, I've identified kind of 4 core disruptors that are related to how we've been socialized in society. And because we've been socialized about these things, they're basically invisible in our brains unless we can name it to tame it. So that's temptation, which we've talked a little bit about. And there are new theories just about eating and just about exercise that speak to how our brains treat desire, but it also offers some of the solutions like name it to tame it. Then there's rebellion, which is when we innately want to rebel against the very thing we said we wanted, and that's a very common experience and decision disruptor. Then there's accommodation, which is what happened with Stephanie, where she felt that she needed to subsume her own eating needs that she felt really committed to below the celebratory needs of her friend, and so she ate something she really didn't want to eat. And then there's perfection, and I think that's the biggie, although I've been doing a lot of talking about it, and so far, other people are not saying perfection is the biggie, so I'm kind of curious about that. But perfection is what I juxtapose the joy choice or the perfect imperfect option against. So I want to introduce you to the joy choice, which of course is the name of the book, but I want to say that all or nothing thinking is just about the biggest decision disruptor around. And because it's the narrative we learned in the culture when it comes to eating and exercise, it's invisible, and it forces our choice in our hands without us knowing about it. And as I've been talking about this, professionals in health and well-being and healthcare are talking to me about how they try to get people to understand about all or nothing thinking and to try to be more flexible, and they're not interested because people feel that you're dumbing it down, even though the research suggests that being flexible and doing something instead of nothing better predicts behavior, both eating and exercise, than trying to do it perfectly or sticking to the plan. We've been brainwashed that if we can't do it right, it's not worth doing at all. And I think that is maybe the biggest force as a society that we're up against. And I'm starting to call it the dogma of the bullseye. I mean, it's dogmatic. That's how crazy it is. And when I was writing the book was when I realized that it was like a dogma, and I was like, wow, no wonder people are having such a hard time letting go of it. So let's jump to the joy choice. Meet the joy choice. Most often, our strategies to change our eating and exercise behavior begin by following programs, solutions, or rules. Most of them offer us a formula for success, put us on the starting line, and send us off to the eating and exercise races. This standard behavior change formula is a valid and often helpful way to approach changing our behavior. But too often what happens is that when we reach a choice point, eat the fruit I planned or the donut I want, go on a walk or finish that project for work, the whole shebang crashes. Once I started thinking about the fact that it's our in-the-moment choices that determine whether we ultimately achieve lasting change, I came to my own choice point at work. Would I keep doing what I was doing or shift? And always up for the challenge, I shifted. Right away, I learned that our general strategies for navigating our eating and exercise choice points determines whether we achieve our greater goals and long-term aspirations. But the choice point pertains to our eating and exercise plans, not the greater goal. So if our reason for changing our behavior is because we want to have more energy or we want to live longer or whatever it is, those are goals, and I'm talking about our more mundane daily plans. I began to see that the plans we create for ourselves concern the near term, what we will do next week, tomorrow, or at dinner tonight. And as we've seen, our intentions and plans bite the dust when stress, anxiety, and too much to do momentarily disrupt our executive functioning, preventing it from keeping us on track with our goals. So the solution becomes learning how to successfully navigate these choice points, the never-ending challenges that our specific eating and exercise plans confront, so we can stay on the path, even when there's an unavoidable detour. So that is the joy choice, the perfect imperfect option that lets us do something instead of nothing. And I was talking about this in Austin at the University of Texas, and at the end of the talk, this very esteemed professor in the room said, Michelle, I just have to push back. He said, do we really need to teach people that something is better than nothing? What do you think the answer is? Yes, yes, and yes. But we actually need to do more than that. We need to, because and this is what he said, haven't we been talking about this for decades? That something is better than nothing, with the 1996 Surgeon General's report on physical activity and health that said we can accumulate physical activity throughout the day. Don't people get this? And it goes back to the dogma of the bullseye. So we actually need to do more than help people learn this. We have to actually inspire them. We have to make it be heart connecting. And the way we do that, and this is another reason why it's called the joy choice, is we help people understand that any type of momentary decision that we may make when we make the perfect imperfect option that lets us do something instead of nothing, we're not just making a decision in the moment that supports our eating and exercise goals. What we also need to do is we need to help people understand that when we do that, we're staying in sync with ourselves. We're helping ourselves take care of ourselves, and that connects to the things and people we care most about. Some contend that joy is the feeling of a match between the moment and our core sense of self. So when we can help people learn that, when they make a choice that favors their healthy eating or exercise, not in a perfect way, but in some way that they're actually, in a way, contributing toward who they are at their core and the people and projects that they care most about tending to, that's how we make it more inspiring. So I'm going to pause there. I didn't get a chance to talk a lot about executive functions, but that's our innate brain-based system that evolved to help us problem solve, deal with novel situations, pivot, manage long-term projects. And so, it took me a long time to get to this in this talk today, but if automatic habit formation can't work for you or for most people because of the context we live in and the inner conflicts we might have with our eating and exercise, then we need the opposite, which is consciousness and strategically harnessing our executive functions, this part of our brain that is there just to do this very thing, and help us tip the scale so that we will be more driven to make the choice rather than let the disruptors take over, whether it's conscious or unconsciously. I'm just trying, I guess what I'm going to do is read one ending thing, and then I'll open up for ending questions. So let me go to that page. So the joy choice, the story you've been waiting for. The joy choice transforms the high stakes, hard work of sticking with the program into something new, a fresh and joyful approach for navigating the daily decisions and conflicts we face about what to eat or how to fit our exercise in and still meet work, family, and other life needs. And this profound change changes everything. The joy choice celebrates and supports our brain's innate self-management system for making the consistent, healthy eating and exercise decisions that underlie achieving lasting change. By turning the behavior change story on its head, we get straight to the heart of lasting change. And that concludes the formal part of this talk. Thank you for coming. But I'm opening up for questions, so does anyone have any questions about this? And again, I welcome pushback, so if you're concerned about anything,
You mentioned a couple of personal stories with your husband and his great exercise routine, and different people have different habits. Has the book and what you've learned from writing it changed your life in some ways, personally, your family, your life, your family's life?
well, it may have changed my life in that I may never write another book again. It's made me think a lot about choice points. I have started, I didn't talk about the method I developed to operationalize the joy choice and support the 3 primary executive functions because there wasn't time, but it's called POP, which is an acronym and a metaphorical action of taking charge. So I use POP in my life. I use it actually just beyond a decision about eating or exercise. I use it when I'm at any challenging point, and so I talk myself through, guided by that. So that's a way that it's changed my life. You know, I think whenever you do something significant that is really challenging, it also makes you think about your priorities and how to get back on track once you're past a really busy phase. So that's something that's been on the forefront of my mind recently. Thank you for asking that. Are there any other questions?
Michelle, I've read your book and I love it.
Thank you.
But can you give, for the benefit of those who have not read your book yet, can you give some examples of using choice, a moment of a choice point, and how somebody can choose the joy choice?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Very concrete. So, hold on. I just have to get to this one thing, and I could just answer it, but I think it would be better if I really quickly read something. And here it goes. I spontaneously stopped by my friend Sherry's house and invited her to join me on a walk. She opened the door barefoot, dressed in her yoga clothes and holding her mat under her arm. I wasn't surprised when she regretfully declined my invitation, explaining that she was about to start her daily yoga routine. But as I turned and started down the sidewalk to continue on my own, she suddenly yelled after me, "Wait, I'm coming with you. I just have to put on my trainers." I was happy but surprised. "I thought you couldn't walk today because you were doing yoga." Sherry laughed. I reevaluated. Today, spending time with you will be my yoga. So that's an example, and it's a great example, and you can ask for Sherry's autograph afterwards. But it's a really good example because it shows how she's flipping, and it demonstrates so clearly that the value of any choice depends on the context of all the other choices. Now, Sherry's a physically active person, and the book is for people who are not regularly active, for people who struggle with this. So a choice could be, I wanted to take a 60-minute walk, but I just had too much work to do. And so instead, I realized, well, and how you do this? Well, I can't take the walk that I had hoped to take. What else can I do? Let me open up my options and consider alternatives now, later, with whom, what. And so later in the evening, I walk around the block with my family, and that's the joy choice. It was far from the 60-minute walk that I wanted, but it helped me make the perfect imperfect choice that let me do something instead of nothing. And so that's an example. Or if you are following an eating plan, the other thing Stephanie that I started with could have done, she could have participated in the celebration through saying words, or she could have eaten part of the offering, the dessert offering her friend gave her. She could have come with her own dessert, and she could have said to her friend, I'm following a plan that I'm feeling so good on, I'm going to have this instead. So there are all kinds of ways we can be flexible, but if we haven't learned to do it, then it doesn't come naturally, and we don't think it's good enough. And it's actually, good enough is what research is showing gets most people to stay on the path, and that's really the goal of the book. So, yeah.
What's coming up for me as I'm listening to you, and I did read the book and I loved it, and I'm trying more and more to utilize your strategies, but it's not discomfort for me, it's feeling that other people are going to be uncomfortable, and that makes me uncomfortable, and so that's a whole separate struggle. So I don't know if anybody else identifies with that, but that's what I find, is that I'm comfortable saying, you know what, that's not going to be a good fit for me right now, but other people aren't used to receiving information like that, and they don't always handle it well. And I don't want to deal with that. So that's just a different perspective.
Right. No, and actually other people have asked me this very question before. I mean, this is something people are talking about. And so, there's a couple of different thoughts. One is that by modeling, you're teaching people, and when you're aware that that is an issue, even naming that part of it, I'm comfortable, so I'm naming, I know they're going to get upset, and it's that self-awareness and mindfulness that really gives us control of those feelings. The other thing that I think could be like a proactive, I don't know what, there's another word I'm looking for than that, but you could even say, I know that this probably isn't something that, or maybe this isn't something that you're used to, but because I'm finding people are kind of taken aback when I say this, starting with that, and so that they don't have to be defensive. And they can feel like, oh, I'm part of what other people are doing. If you're like some of the people that I've been talking to about this, they're kind of taken aback when I say this, but I've been following an eating plan that really, I feel so good that I don't want to stop. So, that both those two things, so that they can feel their feelings and not necessarily have to react, and two, letting them know how positive it is for you and why you wouldn't want to compromise. Yeah.
So I have two questions. One's actually a question to you. I'm wondering how much you think that that's people thinking you're judging them negatively because of the choice that they're not making.
I don't know.
And my question to you was, how much do you see a lot of this, the issues with choice and all this factoring into traditional gender roles? Because I feel like a lot of this is very much women have to do thus and so. And
with this question, that's interesting. I have heard both. I mean, I would tend to, years ago I would have said this was pretty exclusively a female issue. I think I've heard enough now to know that it's pretty exclusively is an overstatement. But accommodation also comes in, and that would be the accommodation disruptor, but accommodation also comes in with work. And one of the stories I tell is about this clinician who hired me to give a talk, and then afterwards he pulled me aside and said that he didn't give himself permission to exercise because he had so much work to do, and when he did, he tried to hide behind the pillars on the way to the gym so people couldn't see him. So, I think in our society, whether it's other people's feelings or not wanting them to feel judged or hurt or dealing with the reaction, or gosh, we're always supposed to be working, our self-care we haven't been taught yet. I mean, I think the ship is slowly turning, but I think we haven't been taught yet to do it. But, gender roles are a part of it. Women have greater pressures regarding weight and beauty norms, and, even though there are norms in society. So, it's interesting. I found that when I initially just focused on female-related gender roles and pressures, when I pulled back, I found that actually lots of people experience them, and I never would have gotten there if I wouldn't have honed in on just women. So I think there is a lot of value in focusing in on gender and other things like race and ethnicity. Well, thank you all, and I'm happy to answer any questions as I sign books for anyone who wants. Thanks for coming.
All right. So thank you all so much. So Michelle is going to come over here and sign books.